Hello, my name is Judd Vance from Bonding with Board Games. Today I'm going to do a review on New York 1776, published by Worthington Publishing 2014. Mike and Grant Wiley are the designers. This is a low complexity block game covering the Battle of New York from 1776. Let's go in and take a look at it. Okay, here's a little overview of the map. You have New Jersey over here, Manhattan, home of the greatest baseball team in the world right there. Connecticut's up here, Long Island's over here. Now I'm going to zoom in a little closer. Okay, right here I show you what some of the units look like. The original game came with these stickers. As a Kickstarter adder, they added these alternate stickers, which I much prefer. I think they're easier to read. This is militia, Continentals, artillery. Sometimes that might be a little hard on old eyes like mine to catch the difference, whether that's a thick stick or a thin one. I didn't show the other type of old type of sticker for the leader, but this is one of the leader blocks. You can see the strength points, strength 3, 2, 1, just like any other block game. The leaders, this is how many units he can command, and this is how many he can move. Units can only move one area or one point to point in this. If you have a leader, he can move himself, like this guy, Green, can move 8 units and himself up to 2 spaces. So I did this initial setup, mostly. I have some units over here to demonstrate combat. The Americans have to divide up half their force and put that and George Washington in New York City. And then the rest of the half they can put anywhere. And I'm going to give you a strategic hint in this game. Don't try to hold New Jersey and Long Island. There's 3 anchors that the British can hit. If you try to divide your forces up 3 ways, you will be hit and hit hard. If you try to break it up and hold 2 places, they will pound you because they will have everybody hit one and just crush your army. So just put them in one. Save you that grief. I have beat somebody badly when he tried that. I have tried that strategy and got beat badly myself. So don't do that. Okay, the British always start over here on Staten Island. At the start of a turn, let me talk about the victory conditions first. The way the British win is they kill the Washington block. There's George. It looks much like Green in the picture. If you kill that block, you automatically win. If you can drive the American strength down, I don't remember what the number is. I think it might be 10. Total points, they lose. You've basically destroyed the Continental Army. For the British, you have to drive them down. It might be 20 strength points if I remember right. They start with an awful lot. So it's kind of like the Bunker Hill victory, or Breed's Hill if you're calling it by the real hill they fought it on. Yeah, they won it, but they took almost 1,000 casualties, I think it was, to do it. So you're basically giving them like a Pyrrhic victory. So at the start of the turn, each side is going to roll a dice to determine how many points. If you've played stuff like Hold the Line, the Hold Fast, you get action points. What's interesting is the British will always start with 2 and the Americans will start with 1, and then you roll a die. If it's odd, you add 1. If it's even, you add 2. That's all you're going to end up with. Americans can 2 or 3, and the British will have 3 or 4. Whoever has the lowest number goes first. If there's a tie, it's American. So since the British start off like this, there's only a 1 in 4 chance that the Americans can start with more than, that the British will actually get to go first. But that's interesting because sometimes the British go first and you're not ready for it because you have a 75% chance and you assume you'll always go first. So that's a very neat mechanic built into this game. Also, if that die is even, which is going to give the British more movement, they can move their ships. If it's an odd roll, where they're only going to get 1 point out of this, if it's an odd roll, they don't get to move their ships because the weather did not always cooperate them, which is very tough. You got these ships driven by wind, and the wind isn't always working for you. This is an interesting battle because you have the world's strongest army and definitely the strongest navy, and you got the small force of farmers trying to hold a city full of islands against this. So it's a very tough go, but the British have problems pinning them because the weather doesn't always work. So you get these points you can move. It costs a point to move a single block. Or you can spend a point to move a general. Like here I have, oops, what happened? Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Or here, like I have Cornwallis, he's 9-2. Sorry, see if I can get it where you can see it. That means he can move himself and 9 other units up to 2 spaces.
for the 1 point. So you get the generals, they move a lot of people. Each side has 2 generals that can move 2 spaces and 1 general that can move 1. In this case, Howe can move 10 blocks, which is great, but he can only move in 1 space. That represents him being much more cautious. For the Americans, it's Lee, Charles Lee, where Greene and Washington are able to move 2 spaces each. So you can spend a point to move a whole army, a point to move a guy, or a point to move a ship. Now, the British can move amphibiously. I mean, they both can. I'll talk about that in a second. But for the British to move, they have to have a ship between the 2 places they're wanting to go to. So like right here, they start with all their ships here. It doesn't matter 1, 2, or 3. They can move an entire force across for 1 point and hit and then do an amphibious invasion. The ships can move, but there's a problem with this and there's rules. See these? I don't know if you can see these or not. There. Let's see. They look like little castles. These are fortifications. So you have New York City and Paulus Hook. Think of it, if you've ever played Mark Simonich's games, it's like the zone of control bond. As long as the Americans control both sides, the British can't pass through there. Over here, it's Brooklyn and New York City, so the British can't even move up here until they take one of these. So they're going to have to go across here, and then work their way up. Then you have another pair way up high, which is Fort Washington and Fort Lee, if you're familiar with the battle. So they have to take one of those to keep that lane open for those ships to move in. Now, the Americans can freely move. They can never move across here to Staten Island, but anywhere else, they can move from anchor to anchor. It represents like Marblehead's, John Marblehead's guys. The only thing that will stop them is if there's a British ship. If you put a British ship in that zone, they are blocked. They cannot transfer across here. The British can, the Americans can't. The Americans can go up here or over here, but they cannot move where a British ship is. Problem is, the British have a very hard time hemming the Americans in because you got to coordinate these ships. You can only move, I think it's 1 space, maybe 2. I don't remember the rules. I prefer 1 as a house rule. I think it makes the games more interesting. But yeah, you can spend your 3 points you get, let's say 1, 2, 3, and then you're not even moving your military. But boy, you never get the wind working with you when you think you're going to get it working. So it's very hard to hem the Americans in. You have the power in here, and you're going to be chasing them all over this map, trying to pin them in. You split your forces. If you split them up too much, you're going to combine their forces and hammer you. So it's like a good old-fashioned fox chase. Now I'm going to show you how the combat system works. Okay, I set up the battle board here for like a mythical battle here. Whenever you do it, the first thing before you set up any of your units, you're going to draw one of these black blocks. This was a Kickstarter extra. I believe it comes in all the games they sent out. If you're familiar with Napoleon by Columbia, the idea is very much like that. And you draw, I already drew one for each side because it's easier to demonstrate. If you draw, there's 2 types. There are terrain blocks. This is an example. Let's see if I can tilt that right. This is a trench. It says 2 infantries are going to roll 1 less die. Okay? If you get this, after both players draw, the defender has to place his terrain block first, face down somewhere in one of these 3 zones. If you have, this is a tactic block. You just hold on the tactic block and say, I have a tactic block. Okay? Then defender places his block first, then the attacker, and then you flip him over, reveal. But before you reveal, sorry, my bad. Before you reveal these, the defender's going to place his blocks first, and then the attacker's going to place his blocks. So you could, if you have a whole bunch of forces, wait to see where they put them and then try to gang up on one side. Because like Napoleon or a lot of these games, you're trying to break open one of these flanks. The defender rolls first and applies the damage. You roll the dice based on based on your strength you have on this. So like here, they'd be rolling 5 dice. Infantry hit on 6s. These are Prussians. This is British infantry, British leader. He's only going to roll 1 dice. All these guys hit on 6. Here's an artillery. They hit on 5 and 6. Now what is interesting and unique on this is, okay, defender rolls his, applies the damage, then the attacker rolls. But along with this, these are militia units. These are the farmers with their rifles. They didn't know really how to they couldn't mount bayonets on their rifles for starters. And then they didn't really like to see a man charging at him with an 18-inch long knife on the end of his musket. So, and they were very terrified of the Prussians. So the Prussians hit on a 6, but on a 1 and 2, if there's any militia, they flee. So let's say I roll a 2 and a 6 and a bunch of other garbage with my 8 dice. You can take the hit on him and then have him flee. Just put him back here in the reserves. Okay? And then the artillery here. They hit on 5 and 6. Now, British artillery, in addition, will make a militia flee on a 1. All British infantry will make the militia flee on 1. So if I roll, these guys, they roll 1s and 2s, they do nothing. Continentals are not afraid of them. They'll stand toe to toe. Artillery's not going to run from them. Leaders aren't going to run from them. But if I had a militia here and you roll a 1 or 2, he's gone. So that's a very interesting concept in this, and it really makes you think through how you're going to place your militia and how you're going to manage your risk. You have the choice when it's your turn. You know, Americans have rolled, now I'm going to roll. I have a choice. I can either move or fire. This is much like these games of 3. I could have him fire and him move. You can't go flank to flank. You have to go to the reserve first and then over. But I have an interesting tactic block that says I can move and fire. And almost it's 2 units that can do this. Anytime you see 2 units sitting back, you almost know the guy has this. And what I'm going to do is, after you flip the blocks over, I'm going to roll, and then I'm going to, okay, this looks like the weak flank. I'm going to have these guys move over here and fire. So the tactics blocks and the terrain blocks add a very interesting dynamic to the battles, just like they did in the Napoleon game. I really like that part much more than most of the other three flank games. Those blocks really add a lot of fun to it. Now, what's cool about this is, after 1 round of combat, you can decide defender first. If you want to pull out of the battle, then the attacker. If you choose to pull out of the battle, you line up all your infantry and you get 1 die per block. So if they were pulling out, in this case you get 7. But if they don't and you blow open a flank, like let's say I get hot and roll 5 hits over here and these guys die or flee and die and all this, at that instant the battle's over. And I'm going to roll dice for all the strength of everybody. Basically, the flanks collapse, so I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 28 dice versus 7. So you really don't want those flanks to break open. So you'll be managing, a lot of times Americans will go in there, fight 1 round, pull out, 1 round, pull out. If you're doing amphibious invasion, first round, they're going to roll, all units are going to roll 1 less dice. And I believe it's 1 less dice if you're also in a fortification. So you're going to try to hold up in these places, take the losses, move out, take the losses, move out, take the losses, move out, and keep running from the British. The battles are very interesting, especially when the British split their forces up too much and don't realize it, and the Americans combine their forces and then attack them and hit them hard, and then the British pull out. But that's basically how this game is played, the combat and the regular system, and it ends up with the great fox hunt.
Alrighty, now that we've seen how it plays, here's my take on it. When you hear simulation tossed around, some people really like it to be so detailed they want to see every battle played out in the exact order of which it happened. That's not this kind of game. You'd have to bog it down in lots and lots of detail and rules, and I don't find them particularly fun. I want to see how I do against my historical counterparts with a little more options. What I look for more in a simulation is it simulating the higher level concepts. In this case, the victory conditions really nailed it. In this battle, the British won, but the Americans won the war. William Howe said as much 2 years later that they blew their chance to win the war by not crushing the Continental Army at this war. So by having the Americans escape and get out of this with so much strength points, you're going to live. Historian Joseph Ellis, one of the best on the topic, if you haven't read his books, you should. He said the objective of the American Revolution wasn't New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, Charleston, all of which the British took. It was the hearts and minds of the people, and as long as the Continental Army lived, the Revolution still lived. So when they got away, the Revolution kept going, and George Washington figured that out at that point and decided to use his Fabian tactics that said he wasn't going to have his whole army crushed in a single battle. He almost saw it happen. So he was only going to offer the battle when the odds were in his favor, and you were not going to pin him in and catch him. So that victory condition is excellent. Also, if you kill Washington, you win the game. That's a pretty cool idea because guys like Lee and Gates probably had too much ego to figure that out like Washington did. For the other side, where you can take the British down so far, I think that catches a little more abstraction of the British are going to find out after Bunker Hill, if they had another repeat of Bunker Hill, that every inch of this was going to be extremely bloody. They might have lost their stomach for it a lot earlier. Also, even if they take it, it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory. So that's factored in there quite nicely. So I really like that. Also, the battle tactics, the three flanks on this with the terrain, I really like it for such a simple system, because especially with the bayonets parts, because in this battle, the numbers were semi-even at the beginning until the smallpox hit the American forces. But even with even numbers, it was trained killers, basically the best army in the world up against a bunch of inexperienced troops. So, you know, when they're using their hunting rifles, hey, that's great for accuracy. But once the British got to about 50 yards and fired that wall of lead at you, then charged at you with an 18-inch bayonet, they dropped their guns and ran. So the fact that that's factored into the battle, especially with the Hessians, of which they were terrified of at this point before they learned to have a good hatred of them later. So that's really neat how they factored that in. Also, if one of your flanks collapse, it's quite deadly, which is what happened early in the first battle. So for such a simple game, these high-level ideas are really nicely captured into it. Now, where it's not going to get it is when I play this game often as the Americans, I run from Long Island to Manhattan up to Bronx, up and around Connecticut, then swing back down to Long Island. That's not the route they took. You really can't jump across to New Jersey and run because you're kind of hemmed in on the map. And the time scale of how fast your military moves isn't going to capture that. But what they did capture was that they couldn't pin him in, and also, or pin Washington in, I should say. And also the way the British Navy, you get so frustrated as a Brits when your Navy can't move because the weather didn't always cooperate. So you're in this fox hunt trying to pin him in, and then you spread your forces too thin. And almost every game I've played of this, actually every game, there comes a point where the Americans gather up and do one big counterattack like they did at Harlem Heights and put it on the British. So, and most of the games I play of this have went down right to the end, almost on a die roll due to the victory conditions. The only times it doesn't is when the Americans split up their starting forces too much at the beginning, the British pound them. That's a strategic hint for you, by the way. Don't do that. It's happened to me, and I've done it to other people. So you split your American forces up in two sections and hold it there. But it captures, it's very fun and intense because of this trying to hem in Washington. The fact the British get to go first 1 out of 4 times keeps you from being able to plan anything out too much, and it hurts, which kind of captures the first battle where they put that big flank on them down on Long Island. So it is quite tense, quite thrilling, fast, easy. Love the game. For a while, I thought it might have been my favorite game of 2014, but I think I gave that nod to Hold Fast Rush at the end. But it ended up being one of my top two games of the year. Also, the Kickstarter on this, they came out with the book right up front. I think the copies that they had left over, they still sell the book. If you don't know anything about it, consider it like the most excellent designer notes, 50 pages on the background of the battle. They also included the alternate stickers too, at least. You can check out their website and check it out, but early on that's what they saw. Even if you weren't on Kickstarter, you could still get all the bonuses. So that's that game. I really enjoyed it.